What would you do if you suddenly became sure that the person closest to you in your life was no longer the person you knew? They look like them, they sound like them, but they're different. Something's wrong.
They come from another world, spawned in the light years of space, unleashed to take over the bodies and souls of the people of our planet.
In 1956, director Don Siegel adapted a book by Jack Finney about body-snatching aliens. This movie perfectly tapped into the fear and paranoia of McCarthy-era America.
Can't you see? Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
Then, 20 years later, Philip Kaufman directed his own adaptation of the novel, which in turn also happened to perfectly tap into the bleak, disillusioned and distrustful post-Watergate 70s America. Matthew! Both these movies took the concepts of aliens from outer space, but grounded them and added an extra dimension of fear by suggesting that our enemies might in fact look just like us. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of alien horror as we discuss two groundbreaking versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Munzer, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres one series at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 7th series exploring alien, cosmic, and sci-fi horror, and this is part 3, in which, as that intro suggested, we are going to be deep diving into two different versions of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's the 1956 version and the 1978 version. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. I would urge you all to give these movies a watch. They're both brilliant before listening to our discussion. Lots to cover, let's get straight into it. Joining me to discuss all things Invasion of the Body Snatchers, one of my very favourite podcasters. She was last here discussing Martyrs with me in our Mind and Body series, and she's back. Co-host of the Gaylords of Darkness podcast, columnist for Rue Morgue magazine, and writer for Final Girl, the brilliant Stacie Ponder. Hello!
Hi, Mike. Hi, everybody.
How are you? How's 2021 treating you so far?
Oh, God, it just gets better and better, you know?
Yeah?
Yeah, it's not like the days since I was here last time have just all blended together. It's like...
Oh, God, I know. The world is kind of slowly here in the UK starting to open up again. Maybe too soon, we don't know, but let's see. What's been going on in stateside?
I mean, people have been pretending for like a year at this point that it's over, you know, like, and so you start to feel a little crazy. Like,
yes.
This is still happening, though. It's still happening. So that's only getting worse as the weather gets nicer and nicer.
I know, that is the worry, isn't it? That I think we're all a bit like, oh, well, surely this is over now, right? Because it's so sunny outside, you know?
Yeah.
Surely there's no virus anymore.
Yeah. The sun's out. It has to be over.
Exactly. Oh, God.
So,
to escape from the real world's problems and escape from this planet Earth for a moment, I want to ask you a little bit about the subgenre that we're covering this series: aliens, invaders from Mars, UFOs, pod people, all of that kind of thing. Stacie, are you a fan of this subgenre?
Sure. Yeah, I really like these movies. We just, on my podcast, Gaylords of Darkness, we recently covered The Fourth Kind.
Yes.
which I had never seen.
What a terrible movie.
Wow. Yeah. Well, movie's a strong word, isn't it, to use for that? Yeah, that's terrible. But alien invasion stuff, I do really like it, but it doesn't frighten me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe because I believe in the goodness of everybody, Mike. You know, so I say, if aliens are going to show up, why would they automatically want to probe me in places.
What is their obsession with probing people? That's what I want to know. Like,
well, especially when they basically look just like we do, like the little gray men, like they've got 2 eyes and a head and 2 arms. Like they probably, honestly, like have holes also.
yes, exactly.
Don't they know what's going on in there already?
No.
So
They're all perverts, all these aliens.
yeah, they're perverts.
I know, it's true, actually. Like, that was what I was going to ask you. Like, do you find kind of alien movies scary in any way? Like, I remember being terrified the first time I saw Ridley Scott's Alien, but I think that one, it feels like a bit of an outlier almost, doesn't it, in terms of how terrifying that movie is compared to most.
Yes. Well, it's, it kind of follows the slasher paradigms.
Yeah.
So it has that sort of sensibility to it, but it also has the body horror aspect of it. So that to me is very different than like the flying saucer lands and
yes.
Although I will say I saw V when I don't know if you're familiar with V, the television series.
Was Robert Englund in that? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was huge. And I saw that when I was a kid. And so it's, I guess I should be more afraid of the aliens than I am. But I'm not. I'm more worried about my crazy, like, QAnon neighbor than I am of like, the saucer's going to land and they're going to come in my house. And, like, who cares?
Yeah. a little probing never hurt anybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very true. So we're going to talk about the two Invasion of the Body Snatchers movies, 2 adaptations. Before this week, I suppose, how familiar were you with these movies and with this story? Had you seen these movies a lot? Had it been a while? What's your sort of background with these movies?
It had definitely been a while since I'd seen either of them. I had only seen the original, the 56 version, maybe once or twice a long time ago. But the 78 version is like, I saw that when I was a kid, and it's a movie that sticks with you forever.
Yeah.
And so it's long, that has long been one of my favorites for sure.
I was telling somebody a story on the podcast recently, actually, about one of my earliest memories is like sort of walking downstairs to my parents' living room in the middle of the night, and they were watching TV, and I can't remember why I'd woken up, and then I just happened to walk in and they were watching Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the 70s version on the TV, and I just happened to walk in at the very last moment when you see Donald Sutherland screaming, and I just remember that image, and I didn't even know what film it was, but I just remember that image haunting me for years and years until I eventually saw the whole movie as a teenager, and I was like, oh, this is the movie that traumatized me as a child. Yeah.
That's where all my nightmares come from.
Exactly.
Okay.
But it's true that is a movie that stays with you, right? Those images. God.
Yeah. Well, and it became one of those movies that several clips from it, especially that ending, would show up in the list of scariest whatevers. And, in the 80s, the sort of clip film like Terror in the Aisles, and like horror fans love to watch clips from horror movies. And they were really popular for a while, and so even if you hadn't seen the film, like surely you definitely know that ending.
I know, and that I do kind of I do think that's a shame. Like I think so many of the most classic horror moments for me were probably spoiled by watching so many great like Bravo's 100 Scariest type shows, when I was a kid. It was like, damn it, I wish I'd seen The Exorcist 3 having not seen that jump scare moment, and so many other moments like that, that are played to death these days, aren't they? I think.
Yeah. They're iconic, and this one certainly has some iconics. Oh my gosh, this movie.
Really,
it's just it had been a while since I'd seen it, and I was just blown away again.
Stacie, this film blew my mind. I cannot wait to talk about it. But let's begin by talking about the incredible 1956 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Miles, where do they come from?
I don't know.
Suddenly, while you're asleep, they'll absorb your minds, your memories.
I don't want any part of it.
You're forgetting something, Miles.
What's that?
You have no choice.
From city to city, an incredible hysterical panic spreads. As the unimaginable becomes real, the impossible becomes true.
Stop and listen! Stop and listen to me! Listen! Listen! Listen to me! They're not human! Can't you see? Everyone! They're here already! You're next!
So, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This was 1956. It was directed by Don Siegel, who I think he'd actually made a career of movies like westerns. He directed a couple of John Wayne movies. He would go on to work with Clint Eastwood multiple times, and he would direct Dirty Harry in 1971. But Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a really creepy alien film, the likes of which we haven't covered yet so far. Because these aliens look like us, right? They come down from outer space in these pods and then they replicate human beings. So you don't really know who might be an alien and who isn't. That's what makes this particular movie so iconic and so scary. And this particular film is set in a little fictional California town of Santa Mira, specifically on our main character, Dr. Miles Bennell, played by Kevin McCarthy, as he experiences the horror of this alien invasion, and nobody believes him initially. At the beginning of the movie, he's he's locked up in like a sort of psychiatric facility, it looks like, and he's trying to explain to people what's been going on, and of course no one believes him. And then he tells his story of what happened. So then we go back and we see the way in which all of his family and friends are slowly taken over by these pod people. So, Stacie, we'll get to the film in a minute. I want to start off by asking you just a little bit about the backdrop of this movie. Now, we've talked about War of the Worlds so far on this podcast last week, the 1953 version. We're going to be talking about more 50s alien movies as well after this week. But, you know, what, in your opinion, was the reason for this sudden boom of alien invasion movies happening, particularly in America in the 1950s?
It was a thing, wasn't it?
It was a thing.
It was a whole thing.
A lot of theremin as well, like, woo!
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it stems from the post-war anxiety. And as the Cold War was starting to ramp up, and evil communists, Evil communists. If you look at it as a post-World War II kind of phenomenon, it's really interesting to me to parallel this sort of invaders from space versus how did the Japanese handle it with the creation of Godzilla.
Yes.
Right, and that sort of was their wartime fears of like, look what mankind has done to each other. We're all paying the price. We're grieving for, the people who have died. And in America, it's like, look out, we're going to get invaded. They're going to invade us because we're the greatest country, and so they're going to invade us and try to change who we are as Americans.
Exactly, and I think there was a big existential mortal threat, which was the atomic bomb. Right, it was this like giant weapon of mass destruction that was a genuine fear for Americans and a lot of the Western world in the 1950s, off the back of World War II. But also there was a more sinister, insidious threat, and that was sort of undercover communists, I suppose, enemies within. This idea that your neighbor or your co-worker could be a secret communist, an American spy or an American enemy. And this paranoia seemed to really grow, didn't it, in the sort of late 40s into the early 50s. This era obviously became known as McCarthyism.
Communism in reality is not a political party. It is a way of life, an evil and malignant way of life. It reveals a condition akin to disease that spreads like an epidemic. And like an epidemic, a quarantine is necessary to keep it from infecting this nation.
Senator Joseph McCarthy, was basically one of the sort of key figures in this, in sort of highlighting that there are many enemies within government, within the Senate, and, out there in your everyday life. There was just this growing fear that anyone could be an enemy, or that anyone could be accused of being an enemy. And obviously it goes into Hollywood, the Hollywood blacklist, that screenwriters might have been secret communists, all of this kind of thing. So this was a different kind of mortal threat. Last week with War of the Worlds, we were looking at real kind of aggressive alien attacks, these beings coming down in ships and literally blowing us up and, zapping us with gamma rays or whatever. Whereas the aliens in this movie represent a different kind of threat and a different kind of fear in America. And that was that they look like us, they sound like us, but they are enemies and they are coming to take our way of life.
They have to be destroyed. All of them.
They will be. Every one of them. Listen, we're gonna have to search every building, every house in town. Men, women, and children are gonna have to be examined. We've got some phoning to do.
Well, I'm going to stay right here where I can watch them.
I'm going to stay with you.
And don't call the police! Nick Rivet didn't find any body on a burning haystack.
One of the things about this movie that the framing narrative kind of changes a little bit is that you can look at this movie as, be careful you don't know who's a communist or who isn't.
Uh-huh.
But you can also read it as a sort of warning about McCarthyism itself.
Yeah.
And accusing other people of doing, so it sort of is indicting communism, but it's also indicting McCarthyism at the same time.
Yeah. And that is, again, another thing that I think makes this movie age a little bit better, right? Because it doesn't just feel like that really kind of old school, we're the good guys, you're the bad guys kind of black and white, I suppose.
Like there has to be some kind of appeal to life as a pod person, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that is another thing that I find really interesting about both these movies is that, yes, these pod people are terrifying and they're going to take away what makes you, you, I suppose. But also there's this kind of indication, isn't there, that, well, would these pod people actually make the world a better place, potentially? Like, they seem to be more peaceful, they seem to be more as one, like maybe they're going to be less fucked up than human beings, you know? And I kind of like that about these movies as well, you know?
Sure, it's sort of a utopia, I guess. They don't seem as angst riddled as the rest of us, you know. Yeah. I say if someone was like, Stacie, you know, you need to fall asleep, and then I'd be like, okay, well, bye, okay. Like, take me. There you go. Congratulations, pod person. You get my student loan debt. You get like worry about the rent being due. Like, congratulations. Bye. You know?
Exactly. Yeah, there's something really interesting about that too. That it doesn't even. Especially in this movie, there's not even anything overtly kind of horrific happening on screen to these victims as well. They kind of are just like, oh, it's really peaceful and it's over in a flash and then you'll feel great and, you know, you'll be one of us and everything's much better here over this side and everything. And it's, yeah, that in itself is kind of interesting about it.
Yeah, I think the 70s, the 78 version, I think does a better job of showing what a post-pod life is and how it's different.
Yes.
Where maybe they just didn't know how they could do that in 56. And so when they give the rousing speech of like, well, you won't have your, you know, emotions. And I did notice one thing that stuck out was imagine a life without faith.
Yes. Yes.
And I was like, well, this is 50s America, right? But,
I know. It's so fun. And actually, we literally, again, just talked about with War of the Worlds, you know, that the text, the H.G. Wells text was so kind of, you know, very much he was an atheist and there was none of that in there. But of course, the 50s movie version ends with them all in a church and it all becomes much more kind of like, well, God is going to save us kind of thing and save the day.
Oh, sure. Well, in the 1950s, I mean, and it's all because of those communists, you know, but in our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag here, like in the 50s, they added one nation under God to the Pledge of Allegiance, like, and put it on our money and all of these things. So it was, you know, the rise of sort of evangelicalism and when the evangelicalism entered our political scene to a great extent. And we're still dealing with it now more than ever, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the beginning with this movie for a second. So the 1956 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This was the first time watching it for me. I'd never seen it before. I really enjoyed it. I think it was really interesting. I think compared to a lot of the other slightly wacky, campy alien movies from the 50s, this movie is kind of played dead straight and it works for me because it's more human in a way. What did you think of, at least on this rewatch, Stacie, what did you think of Invasion of the Body Snatchers 56?
I do really enjoy it.
Yeah.
I was shocked at how early it shows its hand.
Yes.
Like 20 minutes in, we've got a duplicate body on a pool table. You know, It's like, wow, they're just going to explicitly state this. And then the rest of it is kind of on the run from the mobs sort of thing. But I think it holds up really well. The framing device, I'm not a big fan of.
Yeah. That felt like it didn't really fit with everything else we were seeing in a way. It was a strange choice, I think.
Yeah, it feels like a way for them to have some kind of a happy ending with this, like an ambiguously maybe it'll be okay ending. But it kind of shifts the tone of it because the whole, to me, just the essence of the story is so bleak.
Yes.
That there's no way you can win. But then in that 1950s America can-do attitude, it's like, no, we'll call the FBI. Everything will be fine.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think, and we'll probably come back to this framing device in a bit, but I think that was a kind of an ending that was forced upon them. But the framing device, just to explain, is like I said, that it's this character of Miles telling his story after the fact. So we kind of know that he survived it in a way. And they do kind of tack on that ending, like you say, where the Americans and the FBI triumph over the aliens. But you're right. I was shocked and impressed at how quickly this movie gets going. It jumps straight into it. There's a hell of a lot of running and being chased by people and aliens, isn't there, in this?
But it's good, and I like that it does stand apart from the other sort of alien invasion movies of like you said, we get the duplicate bodies, but we don't know what these aliens in this version of the film, like what they are.
Yeah.
Or what they look like. We have the big seed pods, and that's it.
Yeah. And I think because of that, it's kind of aged better, hasn't it? Like there's no kind of dated, well, not really any sort of dated hokey effects or anything like that. I think that maybe compared to most other sort of flying saucer movies of this era, right, this film does feel like it stood the test of time a little bit better, I think.
Oh, for sure. It doesn't, the pods don't look, like they look kind of fakey, but they look fakey in 78 too, really.
Yeah.
And the duplicate body looks pretty good, and it's just, I think it holds up really well.
Yeah.
Really well.
Yeah, me too. So what did you think of our main character here, Dr. Miles, who's played by Kevin McCarthy, our kind of narrator, the guy who kind of takes us on this journey? What did you think of him as the leading man?
What surprised me is how much frank sort of sex talk there was in this movie. He's
pretty forward, isn't he?
Yeah, he's like, I'm gonna turn off the light and let's do it, Becky.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which Becky feels like such an anachronistic name for this, right? Like,
I thought that as well. Becky is, I thought that. I kind of was taken aback by that. I was like, oh, Becky. Yeah, I didn't expect that for a 1950s. But yeah, he's all over Becky like a rash, isn't he? From the beginning.
Yeah. But they're both divorced, which was kind of shocking in and of itself at that point for them to just be like, yeah, we're both divorced and now we can get together. So I liked both of them. I love Kevin McCarthy anyway. But I thought he was affable. He was everyman enough. He didn't have that sort of barrel-chested 1950s hero stature, really.
Yeah, that's true.
It's my cousin.
Wilma? What's the matter with her?
She has I guess you'd call it a delusion. You know her uncle, Uncle Ira?
Sure. I'm his doctor.
Well, Miles, she's got herself thinking he isn't her uncle.
How do you mean, that they're not really related?
No, she thinks he's an imposter or something, someone who only looks like Ira.
Have you seen him?
I just came from there.
Well, is he Uncle Ira or isn't he Uncle Ira?
Of course he is. I told Wilma that, but it was no use. Please, would you stop by and have a talk with her?
Well, Sally says that I'm booked up for the afternoon, but why don't you ask her to come in and see me?
I've tried.
So we're introduced to our main character of Miles, and we also meet Becky, who's played by Dana Winter, sort of love interest, right? The two of them, in the first act, there's this kind of really interesting thing going on in this town where a lot of Miles's patients are coming to him and are suffering with this thing known as Capgras delusion, which is the belief that their relatives have somehow been replaced with identical-looking imposters. And Becky comes to him as well and says, look, my cousin has got something wrong with her. She believes that my uncle is no longer my uncle. And they basically boil it down, don't they, to an epidemic in this town of mass hysteria. Basically just say that everyone's just gone crazy. But as you said, Stacie, this gets going very quickly, and it's not long before we go to Miles's friend Jack's house. Jack finds a body with his exact physical features. This body is lying on his pool table, and it kind of looks exactly like him, but it doesn't yet have all of the human features. It's a sort of blank replica lying there. There's something very creepy about it. What did you think of this first introduction of this kind of replicant body?
I found it so terrifying. Honestly, like it really sort of tapped into all of these weird feelings I've had during the pandemic. And like, I know a movie that you covered recently that I wrote about for Rue Morgue, Pulse, Cairo.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Yeah. What a movie.
And how that sort of exemplified some of these weird feelings that the pandemic has brought out of like, am I dead? How will I know? How will I know? And so like for that sort of weird fear to be really externalized and to like have the other version, like honestly, what it brought to mind is, I know you saw this, by the way, congratulations on your Rondo Award.
Oh, and you too as well. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So cool.
Which maybe you know where I'm going with this.
Oh my God. Is this the fact that so for anyone who doesn't know, Stacie was this is an amazing achievement, and you were put in the hall, what do they call it? The Rondo Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
right?
the Monster Kid Hall of Fame. Yeah,
the Monster Kid Hall of Fame, which is this amazing thing. It's a big deal, and they've put you like top of the thing on the website, but underneath the announcement of it is a photo of somebody who I didn't know. I thought, oh, is that Stacie? But apparently it's not, right? That's who is that?
I don't know. I have no idea. And first of all, I don't want them to change it. Like, it's so fitting for me to win this nice award and be inducted into the Hall of Fame. And I'm scrolling down the article, and it's like, Stacie Ponder. And then there's this picture, and I'm like, that's not me. That
is brilliant.
It's not me. But then all of this, the Pulse and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I start to think like, is it me? Is she me and I don't know? Like, am I going to look in the mirror one day and see this woman's face looking back at me? Like, why is that picture there? Am I dead? Who am I? So
that is so funny. Well, I've even got a friend, because, everyone loves you, Stacie. You've got fans, right? But I've got a friend who listens to Gaylords, and they sent me a screenshot of that, and they went, oh my God, this is what Stacie looks like. I never knew what she looks like. And then I was like, I don't think it is. She's got, and I showed him that you'd commented underneath it, but I love that. I just want to know who this woman is. What's her story?
What is her story? Does she know she won an award? People don't, like, this is my thing, is I'm trying to sort of, and it is partially my fault, because I am trying to cultivate the idea that maybe I don't even exist. At all.
I thought for a long time, and I know I'm not the only one that thought this, that you were the woman on your podcast logo, which is the briefcase woman.
Yeah, people think that's me too. And I'm like, listen, I know I'm not cool, but I'm not that not cool. Like, give me a little credit. But yeah, people think so they didn't even use that picture for the Rondos. Like, they got this this woman who looks like a hairdresser. Like, I don't know who she is. So
yeah.
So just self-identity and who am I? And so I'm like, if I were to get up someday and go in the living room and there's another me on the coffee table, will I be that surprised?
Yeah, it is. There is something like just sort of quietly menacing about these early scenes, isn't there, I think?
Yeah.
With like not quite understanding yet what these aliens are doing, what they want from these characters, and what their plan is, and yeah, there's just this kind of quiet looming dread throughout these like early scenes.
Yeah, my immediate reaction was like, torch it, but they're all just like, well, let's wait and see. If he gets up and starts walking around, like, then we'll be concerned.
Yes.
But for now, it's just a thing on a table that vaguely looks like you. And it's like, well, where did it come from to begin with?
What did you think of just the way this movie looks, I suppose? I mean, it's got that, like, what I find a kind of really gorgeous sort of stark, like sort of black and white contrast. And there are moments like, particularly like that moment we just talked about where there's this almost kind of deep focus where you got like a kind of the body on the pool table in the foreground and all of our other characters in the background. And there was I was quite struck by how this film looked. What did you think of the way it looked?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it does. It plays with shadow a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
And I also loved towards the end when Miles and Becky are really on the run and sort of the wide shots of them out, running into the hard scrabble countryside, the desert. To try to get away, and then the whole sequence in the mine, like the disused mine.
Yeah,
it's crazy. It's a really good looking film, and I think they don't show real close-ups of things that probably wouldn't look so hot now, like effects.
Yeah. Because, again, I think there's something of... Because this was very much an era of kind of big Technicolor movies and everything, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like a choice. Again, covering War of the Worlds last week, that was this very kind of primary coloured green laser lights and red tripods and all of this kind of thing. And obviously that looks so much more dated than this. Almost feels more like a sort of... It's a film noir or something, right? In some ways, like again, like some sort of paranoia drama or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, it feels like it's almost shocking that it's, aside from the themes and all of this, like the way it looks, it feels like a film from at least 10 years prior.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I love the way it looked, but then of course the score. Then reminds you that you're watching a 50s movie when it's like bah, bah, absolutely jumped out of my skin at one moment when this loud piece of music. I think it was when the body on the pool table started to sort of come to life, and there was just this chord that was like, oh my god!
Here comes the marching band.
For
sure.
But I do love it, and that all kind of I'm discovering a lot of these 50s sort of sci-fi horror movies for the first time, actually, but there's a hell of a lot of charm to them, and actually there's so many good ideas, I think, in these movies, because even if the movies don't hold up so well, they all have these stories that are then remade and remade and remade. I mean, again, War of the Worlds, and then this. Also, we're doing The Blob, which obviously had that amazing 80s remake as well. And actually, all of these movies kind of, and The Fly and The Thing from Another World as well, obviously. Like, these movies, they're all... they're products of their time, but they all sparked these really interesting, some of the greatest remakes of all time, right? Were remakes of these 50s movies.
Well, they're at their core, they're very simple stories.
Yeah.
And so, give it 20 years and give it to a fantastic filmmaker and see what they can do with it. Yeah. It's just, you're right, that it's, wow, how many of our, the horror movies that we consider some of the greatest, The Thing, movies like that really are out of this sort of corny cardboard and flashing lights era.
Yeah, you kind of forget that remakes weren't always the sort of thing that you would kind of roll your eyes and groan about, like maybe they are in the 2000s, right? Because actually, of course, like you said, some of the greatest movies that we all love, The Fly, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 78, The Thing, these were all just really interesting remakes, weren't they? Where people were doing new and exciting things with these stories, I think.
Yeah. Well, there's a way to do it that, sort of expands on what came before versus, okay, you're going to make another Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but you're just going to make it bad. Like, you're not adding anything except now Leatherface has a skin disease.
Yes, exactly. Skin disease.
Skin disease.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you're going to expand the universe? Okay.
Well. Exactly. Whereas, the remakes that we're doing in this little run of episodes, they're just so many good ones. There are so many interesting new spins on these 50 stories. But that's not to take anything away from these originals. So This 1956 invasion of the Body Snatchers, as it continues, the menace and tension grows. And it's soon revealed, of course, that these are alien pods. And this, Stacie, this wasn't completely clear to me in this version. I think this is a little bit clearer and more consistent in the 70s version in terms of the rules of how these pod people are made. But essentially, these pods come down from outer space and they sort of spew out these blank bodies, right? And then they kind of latch onto a certain person somehow. And when that person sleeps, they steal the characteristics and the appearance of that person sort of slowly and gradually while that person is asleep. So there is this danger of falling asleep in this film as well. You know, if you fall asleep, you'll be replicated by the time you wake up. So, but I feel like there are a few inconsistencies in this, which we can get to later. But is that about right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it sort of can replicate the shell. Yes. But in order to replicate, to snatch your memories and all of this, you have to fall asleep.
That's right.
So
exactly,
which is terrifying because, you know, how can you combat that? Like, we all have to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. It is a really, and this is a really scary idea, I think, isn't it? That, you know, while you sleep, you're going to be taken over by something, and you're going to lose sense of yourself before you wake up. And you're right, you know, it's like they're left with just having to, and again, you really feel this in the 70s version, but you just have to stay awake in order to survive, and that's all you can do, really. That's a quite scary thing, yeah.
Yeah, it's, I mean, Nightmare on Elm Street, right? You had to stay awake. Mm-hmm. But that was just we have to sleep. There's no way, no American can-do attitude can combat that. Like, it's gonna happen. So
how did you find the way that those pods, again, we kind of catch like fairly small glimpses of them, don't we, in this? There's that shot in a kind of greenhouse where we see the pods sort of opening up and everything. How do you think some of that sort of looks and holds up?
It's not bad.
It's not, is it? I've seen a lot worse. Yeah,
I've definitely seen a lot worse. There's something inherently comical to me in both versions that we watched of, like, when people are carrying the pods around like they're big pod babies, you know. Yes.
And they kind of look like giant sort of corn cobs or something. Yeah. It is. You're right, and they're so massive. But yeah, no, I think they hold up, particularly when you kind of only get sort of little glimpses of them, or bits of them opening up, or bits of them moving and stuff. I think all of that works quite well.
Yeah, it seems like they knew their limitations, and so they keep things more obscured and sort of less is more. The less we see of this, the better.
Yeah, and again, it's something that I really like, and it does makes it feel like a bit of an outlier out of these 50s sort of invasion movies, because it's kind of showing everything on kind of ground level, human level, I suppose, rather than kind of the military shooting at, you know, big flying saucers or tripods or whatever and that kind of thing. Do you still feel that kind of sense of a global threat, I suppose, because we're pretty much confined to this small town, aren't we? And but the amount of pod people starts to grow pretty rapidly, doesn't it? Do you think it pulls that off quite well, that feeling that, like, this thing is spreading quickly?
I think it does. The scene where Miles and Becky are looking out the window at the town square.
Yes, yeah.
With the buses and the trucks and all of this. And I think even that, if you're listening to it and they're talking about, like, all the other cities where they're going to go, and, oh, this truck is bound for this city, kind of lends itself to that and gives a sense of, like, oh, this is spreading out everywhere without having to, like, this just in from Chicago, Chicago's on fire, or whatever, you know, it doesn't.
Yes.
I think it intimates enough that this is insidiously spreading throughout the United States.
Yeah, and I love that it is kind of, it's sort of insidious, and sometimes it's almost happening in the background or something as well, like it's kind of happening on the peripheries, and I really like that as well, this idea that, like, characters that you just see walk, and again, this is something that we'll pick up in the 70s one probably, but characters that you see in the background, or bin people, or garbage people, or whatever, like, there is, like, there's this feeling that kind of it's growing sort of everywhere around them, and I really like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why the framing narrative doesn't really work for me because it feels like a hopeless situation.
Yes.
But then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, he's telling the truth. Mm-hmm. Get the FBI on the phone. Problem solved.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about the ending then briefly. And this is something that I believe, this is something Kevin Lyons mentioned on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, that this ending was sort of forced upon them, that everything had to be resolved, because in the original ending, it's actually that really iconic moment of him in the streets going, you're next. And like, it was supposed to end very much on that bleak, downbeat note. But then I think they had to add this framing device and add this ending of like you said, maybe, do you know what? Maybe he is telling the truth. Call the FBI. Let's blockade this city and contain it. And that's kind of it. Which is kind of a shame, isn't it? Because I think it could have been really chilling had it ended the way that they originally intended.
Yeah, it's very typical. I mean, it's to go back to Godzilla. It's the same thing we did when we recut Godzilla and added Raymond Burr to it, where he was like, well, Godzilla's dead. Wipe my hands. We're done. Back to America. Everything's fine. Whereas in the original version, it's like, this is going to happen again. This isn't over.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We love a nice, neat, happy ending.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But this ending is really strange because it's almost kind of, we don't know for definite that they beat them, but there is just a glimmer of hope that they might, I suppose, right? And I suppose that's enough for this point in time. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's because how can you beat it? Really, like, it's better to leave it hanging of like, well, maybe the government will step in and solve this problem. But if you think about that too much, it's like, how could they?
Exactly. And the last thing I want to ask you about with this movie is, like, again, I don't know whether this was me missing something or whether this was maybe just they were slightly inconsistent again, but the Becky, when she becomes a pod person, that is still her body, right? Like they go to I think it's when they're in the mine bit, or they go to that little cave or whatever it is, and she falls asleep, and then the next thing we see is she opens her eyes and it's like bam 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 and she's turned, and I was like, so for Becky it was kind of slightly different, that she just her body became a pod person, it felt like at that stage. I was slightly confused by that.
Yeah, they don't really address too much what happens to your original body.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Like at Jack's house, we have the body on the pool table and we have Jack. So we know that the two bodies are happening simultaneously. But other than that, we never really see, as we do in the remake, what happens to your original self. So I guess maybe Becky's the exception.
Exactly. So there you go. But I think I had a lot of fun with it overall. I thought this was really good, and it kind of like it zips along, doesn't it? It really kind of drops you straight into the action. It never feels like it sort of slows down for a moment, and all of the characters are quite fun. So overall, I really enjoyed it, and I think this is probably the lesser seen, especially these days. Movie of the two, but is this still a movie that you would recommend people check out?
Oh, absolutely. Especially just to see, if you have seen the remakes, any of the remakes, just to see where it all started.
Yeah.
And how, because it's just a really pure, like you said, it's very lean. By the 20-minute mark, we know what's up, and we've seen a pod person, and it's just, Kevin McCarthy's a delight.
Yeah.
It's just a terrific movie that really zips along and is still effective.
Well, I guess how culturally important must this film be? I mean, the term pod people, right? I'm guessing sort of came from this movie, did it? And that's something that even if people don't know these movies, they probably will know of the term pod people, right? And what that means, I think.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely in the vernacular. It's like drinking the Kool-Aid or something, It's, Even if you don't know where it comes from, you certainly know the phrase.
I have a few days' work for you if you're interested.
Doing what?
Babysitting. My brother died last year. He had a daughter, Olga. She keeps going out to the house where he died. The place is in the middle of nowhere, and I don't like the idea of her being out there on her own.
So 200 a day. Just to go to the house and keep her company.
That's it.
There's got to be more to it than that. You didn't say anything about the house being on an island.
Come on. What's the big deal?
Hello, everybody. That was a little clip you just heard there from one of the scariest horror movies I have seen in a very long time, Caveat, which is streaming right now on Shudder in the UK. This film is really something. I heard good things about it. I checked it out on my own at home with the lights out, and I shit my pants. Yeah, it's really scary. It's a really effective, creepy ghost movie. So that is a little sample of what we've got going on over on Patreon at the moment. This week, me and Louise Blaine and Adam Robinson got together to discuss just how much this movie scared us. We talked about Caveat in spoilerific detail. That episode is available for $5 Patreon subscribers and upwards. So if you want to get involved and subscribe, head on over to patreon.com/evolution of horror. You can sign up at a $5 level to get at least 2 bonus episodes per month. You can sign up at a $10 level, which gets you a bonus episode every single week, including access to our mini-seasons. There's currently a mini-series on Hellraiser, and there's also a mini-series on Hitchcock movies, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can listen to. And if you want to sign up at a $20 level, you can become an Evolution of Horror sponsor. For more information, head on over to patreon.com/evolution of horror. Everybody who's UK-based that signs up gets sent an Evolution of Horror sticker, and everybody, no matter where you're from, will get a little shout-out on the main podcast as a thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to give everybody who signed up in the month of April a very special thank you. So a big thanks to Liberty, Adam Barkin, Sarah Mitchell, Bradley Compton, Mike Leach, Renee Masiajewski, Artem Ustinov, Chris Cavalier, Paul Waller, Mark Oswald, Glenna Lambert, Mark Yates, Michelle Moore, Jason Pullin, Gemma, Rachel Orchard, Shawnee Mahalo, Amy Foster, Red Dirt Sport, Ashley Bozak, AK, Chandler Bong, Madeline Gould, Julie Addison, Razor Wire Alchemy, Chris Rushbrook, Kelly Aragon Diaz, Charlotte Dale, Triffany Criswell, Jessica Pear, and James Turner. A huge thank you to all of those people for signing up to our Patreon. And if you want to join them, then sign up now. Patreon.com/evolution of horror. That's patreon.com/evolution of horror. Okay, let's return to the second half of this week's discussion, in which me and Stacie Ponder cover the 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
They come from a dying world. They drift through the universe, pushed on by the solar winds. They adapt, and they survive. The function of all life is survival. Sleep, sleep, sleep. From deep space, sleep. The seed is planted. Sleep, sleep. Terror grows. Sleep.
Matthew! Matthew! Matthew!
Like the others.
Elizabeth, wake up! Get you when you sleep. Sit up!
Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Okay, Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978. This is obviously a very similar story, similar structure, but they've moved the action to San Francisco, California, and it's set very much in the 1970s. This version was directed by Philip Kaufman, and it stars Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, Jeff Goldblum, Leonard Nimoy, Veronica Cartwright, among other brilliant people. So it's a very similar story. We've got mysterious pods coming down from the sky, hatching pod people who then sort of take over and replicate other people's bodies while they sleep in order to enact a global-wide takeover of the human race. But there are a few key differences which we'll get into. Now, I want to start, Stacie, by asking you a bit about, 1978 in comparison to 1956. We've jumped forward 20 years. And it's fair to say, right, that 70s cinema is very different to 50s cinema. There is a difference here in tone, in style, in mood. And I think in many ways this while the original felt like a quintessential 50s horror movie, this feels like a quintessential 70s movie. Stacey, do you know what I mean?
I think it's interesting that if someone says to me Invasion of the Body Snatchers feels like a 70s film, my brain doesn't go to 70s horror.
Yeah.
Necessarily. It goes to those like mid to late 70s, post Watergate 70s paranoia political thrillers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
It's more in line with those than it is with the horror genre itself. Even though it's got plenty of absolute horror in it. Mm-hmm. But I would stick it with those other films for sure.
Are you a fan? I bet you are, Stacey. Are you a fan of those kind of 70s paranoia thrillers and those types of movies? Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I love them. Oh, man. I love a paranoia thriller. They're so bleak. I love bleak movies. I really do.
And I think that is really what feels like it defines the 70s, both in horror and outside of horror. There is just that kind of like... There is a bleakness, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. Especially American films and the horror movies and all of that. It was sort of like the veil had been lifted. Coming out of Vietnam, coming out of Watergate and all of this. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a perfect movie for that period of time.
Yeah, agreed.
But it's sort of like the dissolution of the nuclear family and feminism and women's rights and women entering the workforce. And it was just such a time of turmoil.
Yeah.
That everything we thought we knew from the 50s and everything we were told is true, it turns out to not be true.
And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes. But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I can say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
By the beginning of the 1970s, everyone was starting to completely lose faith in their government in America, right? We had, this Vietnam War still raging on, more and more people realizing just how pointless it was, essentially, and that this government was sending their citizens to die for no reason. And of course, in the late 60s, early 70s, you had the civil rights movement. You had riots and marches going on related to that. For the first time ever, people were seeing horrific images on the news of the way in which their own police force were treating their own citizens, African Americans. So again, there was this sort of disillusionment and loss of trust of their own system. Then, to top it off, you had Watergate.
Last June 17, while I was in Florida trying to get a few days' rest after my visit to Moscow, I first learned from news reports of the Watergate break-in. I was appalled at this senseless, illegal action. And I was shocked to learn that employees of the re-election committee were apparently among those guilty.
Which essentially encompassed an array of clandestine and often illegal activities undertaken by members of the Nixon administration, including illegal surveillance and bugging the offices of their political opponents. And when this all came out in the open, obviously it led to the House Judiciary Committee approving articles of impeachment against Nixon for obstruction of justice, abuse of power, contempt of Congress. Nixon then became the first and only president in history to have resigned from office in 1974. So all of this was going on, and it just doubled down on this idea of people of America not trusting their own president, not trusting their own government, that the enemies were on the inside, right? And this is such a different vibe to the feeling of the 50s, where the enemy was very much outside and was threatening America. So what you got was, like you said, Stacie, an array of 70s paranoia thrillers. Movies like Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, or All the President's Men, or there's a whole bunch of them, these kind of conspiracy thrillers where people are becoming aware that they're being watched. There was just this growing feeling of bleakness. And, you know, that, for whatever reason, sparked some of the most imaginative and most original movies in American cinema around this time.
Yeah, the mid to late 70s, just... I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre was such a game changer.
Yep.
In the genre. You know, Dawn of the Dead, Halloween.
I mean, 68, even with Night of the Living Dead, it kind of almost feels like it just kind of feels like that was like the birth of a new kind of horror, didn't it, almost at that point? And then everything that followed it. And that, you know, there's a lot of really grisly, nasty stuff as well, isn't there? There's a lot of, you know, the 70s also, you know, I always think of, you know, your Last House on the Left and your horrible kind of I Spit on Your Grave type movies and all of that kind of thing as well. But it was just such an interesting and broad and varied kind of selection of movies we were getting in the genre.
Sure.
At this time.
It's like I was just gonna say, it's like you know, the 50s sci-fi was about the fear of the other. Like, we're always, as American cinema especially, like there's always the other that we're afraid of, whether they are from another country or whatever. And it's just, you saw a shift in that from the late 60s into the 70s of like, well, what if the other is just like you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You know, what if the other isn't an outside force, but just your neighbor? What if that nice house behind the picket fence has Leatherface inside? Like,
exactly. It was even happening over here in a kind of smaller way, but some of the weird horror movies that were coming out of the UK, I mean, because, you know, through the 60s, it was so much about Hammer Studios and these kind of real, you know, classic kind of monsters, Christopher Lee and Dracula and Frankenstein. And then suddenly we had, from 68 onwards, movies like Witchfinder General, and then this kind of wave of folk horror, Wicker Man and Blood on Satan's Claw, and these very weird movies that were suddenly confronting like the kind of weirdos that live out in the woods and do God knows what. And like that again is like just all over. It felt like cinema was going in really interesting new directions, you know.
Oh yeah, and then David Cronenberg comes on the scene, and it's like, oh, you think you can't trust people from other countries? Oh, you think you can't trust the government? Well, guess what? You can't even trust yourself. Like, who knows what's lurking inside your skin sack? You know.
Oh my God, yeah, and there's nothing scarier than like what's inside your own body, right? And that is, and of course I think that's quite important because this movie came after Shivers, so Cronenberg was very much on the scene at this point. Rabid potentially as well. I can't remember if that was 77 or
77.
Yeah. So Cronenberg had a couple of movies. And it does feel like, and I don't know whether it was intentional, but it feels like Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a kind of boiling pot of all of these interesting movies that had come leading up to it, right? Like you say, paranoia thrillers, Cronenbergian body horror, some of the kind of big mainstream sort of studio horror like The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby. Like, it feels like there's elements of all of these brilliant movies that go into this Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yeah, it's... God, what an incredible movie this is.
I know. I mean, I can't actually believe how good it was, because it'd been several years since I'd watched it, and I always have kind of fond memories of it, but I just forgot how good, like, I was completely knocked out, like, from the opening, like, 2 minutes even, where we see sort of the invasion happen, right? The shots of, like, what starts off in outer space, and then through the opening credits as we go down into the clouds, raindrops falling on trees, these little kind of molecules, spores. There's a lot of spores going on as, like, people go about their daily lives. It's so incredible, isn't it? Like, literally from the beginning.
Oh, it's wicked. It starts out and it looks like a classic, like, vintage sci-fi paperback cover. And I love the fact that it is this cosmic force from somewhere else that is so completely unknowable, even down to the way that it looks. Like, it's just wispy droplets of... I get so tired of, like... This is why, you know, alien abduction movies and everything don't really scare me, because it's like, well, they just look like weird people.
Yeah.
You know? But the idea that it's something that we can't even really comprehend... that can float here on the wind and completely take over. Like, that's terrifying to me.
Oh my God, like small parasitic things are the things that really get me. Like, and this is definitely something that we've seen in movies like Shivers by this point, right? But these things that kind of invade your body. Obviously, Alien will do this really well as well a year later. But like, I'm not good with like, I'm not good with insects and kind of squishy, gross kind of these things. In fact, Stacie, I got nightmares from a conversation you once had on Gaylords of Darkness, which was, I think it was, I can't remember how long ago this was, but I don't know if you remember this, but you and Anthony were talking about, one of you had read in the news about these flies that like get inside your eyeballs and lay eggs. Do you remember this? Like, one of you had read about a jogger or somebody that was like running and they got those little flies in their eyes and they laid eggs, and then they had to like remove these kind of eye flies basically from inside somebody's head, and I was like, that has scarred me for life. That's
the jogger ran through like a cloud of gnats, like some kind of weird gnat, and I had forgotten about that. Oh no.
So thank you for that. But that's kind of what the opening scene of this movie gave me sort of associations with, these kind of like horrible small microscopic organisms that are going to do God knows what to you, you know. It's like,
I'm never. Why is everybody so excited that, we don't need our masks anymore? I'm like, are you kidding? I'm never taking it off. I wear it when I go to sleep. Like,
yes.
Give me, nothing is laying eggs in me, thank you.
It's so true. And so straight away we meet our main character, Matthew Bennell, played by the amazing Donald Sutherland. What do you think of Donald Sutherland and his performance in this movie?
I loved like 70s Donald Sutherland, please.
Oh, incredible.
Right. The fluffy hair, the mustache. I'm in it to win it with 70s Donald Sutherland. But it's just, he has this, and this movie taps into it really well, like long before the ending. Is there something about him that is also creepy as fuck?
Yes.
Even when he's being the romantic lead, or something like Don't Look Now, or here when he's by turns really charming. His relationship with Elizabeth, he's really sweet, but there's some strange creepiness or sinister quality that he has lurking under that mustache.
I know. And this is it. This is the face that haunted me in my dreams as a child. There is something quite creepy about his face. And there's something, and it's true, even in Don't Look Now, like it's a devastating moment, but there's something also quite creepy about his face when he's cradling his child, and he lets out that kind of guttural scream at the beginning of Don't Look Now, it's the noises he makes. He kind of goes, "Ooh!" Like there's something about him.
Yeah, he doesn't. It's like he has no reservations about looking weird.
Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, he's very raw.
Yeah. But there's a couple of shots in Body Snatchers where it's when things start to go to heck. And he's like hiding in a closet, looking out. And the way his face is lit and the expression on his face, I'm like, I know I'm supposed to be on his side, but he's terrifying.
I know. I that was a really interesting shot, because I was like, well, you've made him look like the killer in Black Christmas or something, with these kind of like eyes peeking out of the closet. It was a really striking sort of shot, wasn't it? And lighting on his face. It was, he looked terrifying.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that's the point. It ties into the whole, like, who can you trust?
Yeah. And, and he is a really interesting character, because he is really charming and quite sweet as the story goes on. But at the beginning, I kind of really, you think he's this actually very uptight, horrible, arrogant man. He's the kind of, what do they call it? A kind of health inspector for restaurants, right? And he goes, and again, this is something that's so like, ooh, kind of really kind of gets me in all my sort of phobias. But this idea of like finding rats droppings inside food in restaurants and all of that kind of thing. Again, there's something so kind of kind of organic and squishy about this movie from beginning to end. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, but I love his introduction as being this kind of, quite uptight kind of health inspector who no one in this restaurant likes. They throw something at his windscreen and break his windscreen. He's like, but he's not afraid to kind of be this guy and be disliked as well. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it kind of, it's weird. I noticed that like it sets me off on the wrong foot with him because he is so uptight.
Yeah.
But I'm like, wait, he's the good guy. He's finding the rat turds in the soup. Like,
yes.
I want him to do that. So why do I feel anti Donald Sutherland right now?
I know,
You know?
it's really interesting.
really
but
strange.
then I love his relationship with Brooke Adams actually, because I think especially having watched straight off the back of the 50s version, which is so much more old fashioned in the way that that obviously Kevin McCarthy is very much like, come here, and is very much kind of all over her Becky from the beginning. There's something a little bit more interesting about this relationship, isn't there? That they are actually really good friends and work colleagues, even though there is something more, but it sort of takes its time, and I really enjoyed their dynamic,
Absolutely. I like it so much more than if they were a couple from the start.
Yeah.
Or even if it was overly stated, because it's just so much more natural and realistic that it's like these two people work together, they have a lot in common, but she has a boyfriend.
Yes.
But they're clearly attracted to each other. And so I like the way it does develop over the course of the movie until they're at the end moments where they finally confess to each other. Mm-hmm. But it's clear the entire time how much they care for each other. But if they end up just as friends, that's okay too.
How brilliant is Brooke Adams as well?
It's really interesting to me because Brooke Adams, for me, watching this, I was like, the Brooke Adams era. I love this. Like, give me the Brooke Adams era. And then I actually looked at her filmography and I'm like, she wasn't in that many horror movies.
No, I remember her clearly from The Dead Zone.
Zone, yeah.
But what else did she do? Because I'm not that familiar with her.
That's pretty much it, except for like she had like a cameo in The Stuff.
Right,
something. And she was in Unborn. But I think Body Snatchers and The Dead Zone were such huge movies for me, maybe.
Yes.
That just this this has just become the Brooke Adams era. Like, she's just such a huge presence in my mind when I think of this period of cinematic history.
No. Yeah,
that I was actually shocked to be like, you've only seen her really in those two movies.
Yeah, she's so brilliant in this. Elizabeth as a character, I think, is really great, and she and Donald Sutherland are so watchable. And actually, everyone in this movie. Leonard Nimoy, Jeff Goldblum, Veronica Cartwright. This is what a cast, right? What a cast!
Unbelievable cast, and I adore Veronica Cartwright.
She's the best.
She is the best. And you don't get to, she does hear, what she does best, which is react to things. Like, she really is like the audience. Like, she is our window into these worlds, because I would be losing my shit also. We don't want to identify with that character, but in Alien, I'm Veronica Cartwright. I'm sorry, I'm in the corner sobbing, just wanting it to be over.
It's true. And I sometimes feel for her, because I feel like, I think, does she get lumped with roles that people will just sort of dismiss as being, just the hysterical one almost,
right?
Because particularly in Alien, right? She kind of, I suppose maybe next to Ripley as well, she sort of feels like that in a way. I think she's definitely more than that in Invasion of the Body Snatchers, though. I think she's a really great character.
She's the strongest one. She's the survivor.
She's the final girl. She's like the secret final girl to this movie.
Yeah, exactly. I love her.
I know. She's still alive when the credits roll, so we can choose to believe that she prevails, right?
Absolutely.
She's fine.
We don't know that she doesn't.
No, exactly.
So,
well, she ends up on the Nostromo, right? A year later, so.
Yeah. She went from there to NASA, and
exactly into hypersleep for a few hundred years.
Yeah. Everything worked out for her. Yeah,
exactly. So all of the cast are phenomenal in this. But let me ask you, what do you think about the way this movie looks and sounds? Because this is the thing that knocked me out about this movie, just how well it was directed. the look of it looks like a classic 70s conspiracy paranoia thriller. They use kind of really long lenses. They, in sort of crowd shots, it looks like we're looking through surveillance at times. Light, shadows, where it draws on film noir at times as well, like the 50s version. It's got all of these different styles. The sound is doing all of these really subtle, creepy things as well. Again, some of it sounds like noise that you might hear on surveillance on a microphone. There is a kind of creepy score. There's all kinds of things working to make this film creepier,
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. It goes from the sort of crowd shots, but it also zeroes in on little moments that probably shouldn't be uncanny, but the way this film is shot makes them uncanny. Like there's the moment where Elizabeth is on the phone and she hangs up the phone and the phone cord retracts into the wall.
Yes.
And this is afforded a close-up. And it's like, it's just the phone cord.
Yeah.
But then I find myself going, this is unsettling. Can I trust my phone cord? Like everything is suspect,
It's so true. It's something that's a kind of almost like Lynchian thing, isn't it? Where you kind of the most mundane moments are suddenly filled with this sort of uncanny dread or something, and you're like, why am I scared by that? But something off about it, It's like, I love movies that can do that to you.
Yeah, and it really instills that feeling of like, all of the people in both of these movies that know, they're like, it's my uncle, but it's not my uncle, and I can't really describe it, but something is wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think this movie, the way it's shot, really taps into that and instills that in the viewer. Like you start to notice as it's going on, there's a scene where Elizabeth is walking down the street and somebody in the background will be running in the opposite direction.
Yes.
And you might not even notice it at first, but it's just all of this kind of compounds to really kind of destabilize you and unsettle you as a viewer, I think.
Yeah, again, it's like there's always stuff going on in the frame, right, at any given moment in this, and I love that. And you're just watching people, and you're getting the impression it's there's Rosemary's Baby reminds me a bit of that too, where you kind of feel like it's almost like there's a whole other movie going on next door, behind closed doors or behind a wall, and it feels like that with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because it takes its time a bit more before shit really hits the fan with these characters, but that there is stuff going on everywhere in this city and around these people, just on the periphery, and it does a really clever job of that, I think.
Yeah, you start to notice all the garbage trucks.
Yeah, the garbage trucks, which you kind of you can't really piece together until near the end, but it's kind of remains of these kind of bodies, right, that have sort of disintegrated or like fallen to bits or whatever.
Yeah, it's like the wispy husks that are left behind.
Yeah, because you ask yourself, right, you go, well, if all these people are being sort of cloned or duplicated, where are the original bodies going? Like, surely there should be bodies everywhere, and that's what's happening to them. They're being quietly kind of tidied up in all while this movie's going on.
Yeah, and you might not make that connection until Elizabeth finally succumbs.
Yes.
And just sort of collapses. And then it's like, well, she'll be in the back of the garbage truck tomorrow.
My God. Yeah.
It's horrible.
It's horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. And again, what there's the gross, maybe it's also because we've been living in COVID, like you said, there's this idea that like right now we don't want to make any kind of physical contact with other people. But there's something that really kind of got my hackles up about the whole sequence in the sort of the spa, like the Turkish baths type place, right? Because there's something so sweaty and moist about everything in this room, and you just think, oh God, like this is like you think at the best of times this is like a germ super spreading environment, right? And it's like, oh, it's absolutely horrific, that whole sequence, and how they've managed to up the ante from the body on the pool table in the 50s to the body on the bed in the spa in this scene was just wonderful.
Oh yeah, this mud bath place is like my worst nightmare. Like no matter what, like either you're gonna end up with mud in places you don't want mud to be, or you're like hosing that mud out of somebody's places. Like no thank you. Absolutely not. I don't care how beneficial it is for me to sit in mud that someone else was sweating in 10 minutes ago.
It's always like the most big, unattractive men that are going to these places as well. And bless her, Veronica Cartwright, where she has to just like massage that guy on that table throughout that scene as well. But yeah, it is. It's horrible. As the second we step foot in that place, you're just like, oh no, this isn't going to go well at all. Is it?
Yeah. It could have ended there and I still would have been terrified. You know?
Exactly.
No, thanks.
And Jeff Goldblum, what did you think of him? His weird character, right? This kind of like passionate, struggling poet guy. What did you think of him?
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to have a very low Jeff Goldblum tolerance.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Just sort of his Jeff Goldbluminess.
Yeah.
Seems like such an affectation to me.
Yeah.
That I have kind of a low tolerance for it. And more as time goes on. I think it works here because he's just kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like the bit where someone, I don't know if it's Leonard Nimoy, somebody says to him, like, you know, what about your friends? And he just says, I don't have any friends.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's supposed to be this kind of arrogant irritant, isn't he, in this from the beginning, I think. So it works quite well, I think.
Yeah. And you know, and then you find out he's running the mud bath house. Like, it's his business. It's like, what world is this?
What is this guy? I know, what are these lives? People lived weird lives in the 70s, you know?
It was the 70s, man. You know?
70s San Francisco. This is what it was like.
Yeah, I'm a poet who runs a mud house. Like, okay, sure.
Okay.
Sure you are.
Then. But I know what you mean. I think there's something kind of interesting as well, like going back to this idea that when you're a pod person, you lose all emotion. And I guess I was thinking what we have here are very emotional characters, right? Like particularly Jeff Goldblum, and I suppose that really kind of gives you that contrast when he then becomes a pod person. But the same with Veronica Cartwright, the same with all of them in a way. There are these like the you know, what you lose, and I think that's another thing that this movie does well. It kind of shows you what you lose. I think like if we can't have our emotions or our passions or anything, then what are we, I suppose? And I think this movie kind of puts that across really well as well, that you become this just kind of lifeless sack of meat, basically, don't you? You know, like when you see those people at the end working in the lab where, you know, Donald Sutherland's character works, but they're all just kind of going through the motions, no one's talking to each other, and it's like that's what we've lost, like all our kind of humanity, everything that makes us human, I suppose.
Yeah, all of the characters in this movie have their little quirks.
Yeah, exactly.
And they all lose, like, and it's really interesting that one of Donald Sutherland's Matthews, one of his quirks is that he cuts articles out of the newspaper.
Yes.
And then at the end, when we don't know that he's been taken over, he's still cutting things out of the newspaper, but it's just a thing he does. It's like part of his day now. It's not bringing him any kind of joy anymore.
Yeah.
And so you know Elizabeth isn't going to do her weird eye thing.
Her weird eye thing. That is such a... Do you know what? That's another brilliant character moment that they didn't have to put in, but they did. You know, that moment when they're on their little date together and he says, do that I love your eyes. Do that thing with your eyes. And you almost think, ooh, this sounds a bit sleazy. But then actually what her thing is with her eyes is she does this weird little alien eye wiggle from side to side. And actually that just made me kind of love them both even more. That was like their little thing they have together, you know? It was actually even more endearing in a way.
Yeah. This one does a much better job at showing the post-pod world and what we have to lose, I guess, which is... You know, it's just a species surviving versus living. I guess, right? That's what it is.
Exactly. And I think there's that, it's that living, it's that willfulness that these characters have as well, particularly Donald Sutherland's character. Just, you know, it feels like there is no hope for him, really, in the last act, right? To the point where I was almost like, oh, mate, just give it up, you know? Like, what have you got left to live for at this point? You're the only person left, you know, running around hiding under a pier on the beach with 50 aliens coming after you, you know. We kind of think just, you know, what's the point in a way? But that kind of struggle is what makes him human, right?
Yeah, well, that's what part of what makes it so terrifying, I think, is the sense of inevitability of it. Like, you can try to fight the power all you want, and he keeps saying, well, there will be people who will fight. And it's like, good luck. because it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that kind of bleakness. I mean, it is kind of similar structure-wise to a zombie movie, right? I guess it's an apocalypse movie in general, this idea that something is spreading and wiping out the human race, and then what are these last group of survivors actually going to do? There are definitely similarities, I think.
Yeah.
There.
It's sort of like in the zombie films, like as long as you can hold on to your humanity, you can survive. Like we have to work together and hold on to what makes us human, and we will overcome this somehow. And then I feel like Body Snatchers is like, it doesn't matter if you hold on to your humanity. Your moral compass means absolutely nothing in this situation. There are larger forces at work, and there is no hope of overcoming this.
Yeah, exactly. And I like the fact that it's quite ambiguous as to who turns and when as well. Like Leonard Nimoy's character, is he always from the beginning a pod person? Do we know?
Right.
That's really interesting, right? Because he acts pretty off from the start, but like you're kind of led to believe that's just him as a character. But that's really fascinating as well, because you don't even know at what point certain characters do turn as well. And I love that about
One thing, I don't know if you noticed this, but my big thing with the Leonard Nimoy character is like, what is that thing on his hand?
I didn't notice the thing on his hand.
He's wearing like a piece of leather.
Oh, yes. Like kind of looks like a glove with no fingers or something on it.
No fingers, no thigh. It's just like a slab of leather on the back of one of his hands.
Yes, I did notice that. What was that?
I've never seen that before, and I cannot figure out if it was just a stylist thing or
it was like a Michael Jackson-esque kind of piece of fashion wear or something. It was very weird.
Really weird.
I didn't know whether maybe it had something to do with, maybe I'd missed a moment when he had cut his hand and it was a reference to the 50s version with the replicant with the cut on their hand maybe or something, but I don't know. I was just reaching at that point for something, but
so bizarre.
And we get a little cameo, right, from Kevin McCarthy. I thought that was quite a nice moment. Kevin McCarthy running in the streets and then meeting a brutal end as well, pretty swiftly. I thought that moment was kind of chilling as well, actually.
Yeah, I think it's a nice sort of, if you blur your vision a little bit, I think you can look at it as, maybe this movie is taking place simultaneously with the first film. If you take out the framing narrative.
I agree. I was thinking you could almost look at this movie instead of a remake as a sequel, right? That has it spread to San Francisco and has he come there to warn people maybe or something? I don't know. But it's kind of a really interesting little tie-in.
Yeah, because it's an echo of the scene that was supposed to end the original film with him like, they're here, you're next. Like he's still doing the same bit 20 years later. So
I just think poor guy's been doing that for 20 years solid.
And then just gets hit by a car. No one listens to him. He's just been trying for so long. And then he gets hit by a car.
Poor guy. I mean, it's not happy endings for anyone involved in this movie, is it? It's sad times.
Except Veronica Cartwright.
Except Veronica. Thank God. Exactly. Let me ask you about that transformation sequence, that elongated, incredible moment when Donald Sutherland has a little nap on his balcony and the pods start hatching. That was incredible, right? I just thought it was kind of mesmerizing.
It was horrifying. It was mesmerizing. It was gross.
Yeah, so gross.
What is happening? This is when it starts to feel really Cronenberg,
100%.
But it's so cool to kind of see it from start to finish, and how quickly it happens is really terrifying. Like you close your eyes and fall asleep and your face is covered in dried Elmer's glue immediately. Yes. And God, 10 minutes later, there's another you. Mm-hmm. And I do say, like, congratulations, pod people. Like, go for it. Like, it just sucks to be this unknowable alien species And you come here, and then you have to go to work every day.
I know. What the hell? That's a rubbish existence these pod people have chosen for themselves, to be honest, isn't it? Like, more for them.
They still have a mortgage that's due.
Exactly. I did not like the gross kind of like fetus versions of these characters as well.
No.
Oh my God. When you see the kind of like, the not yet fully formed Donald Sutherland, and he's still got his kind of big hair, but he's like not got like proper hands and feet yet and stuff. There's something very disturbing about that whole sequence.
Yeah,
it's gross.
And the sound design in this movie is so good that it just enhances it so much. And it's just like, how is this so great? I mean, I guess no offense to anyone who's given birth, I'm glad my mother gave birth most of the time, but it's so gross, right? Like, we can all agree, theoretically maybe it's beautiful, but in the reality of it, it's really disgusting. And pods are no different.
Exactly. It's the horror of biology that this movie has that really gets to me. And it's I guess like the next few years there is some amazing movies that take that. Alien does it, and then The Thing does it, but this is like peak practical effects, isn't it? Kind of late 70s into the early to mid 80s. It's just incredible.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they really, the slime industry was really taking off.
Slime and latex.
Yeah. So this movie really, I love it, and especially watching it as a bookend with the original where we don't see too much. I do love how much they leaned into this one, and like the flowers. It's very Ridley Scott's Alien of like the flowers opening up and the pods and the weird clear jelly babies emerging, and just it's gnarly.
Yeah, and you're right, like they really they take their time with it. They let these scenes play out. Like, it feels like you're watching all of this happen for like 5-10 minutes, of just like just these characters sleeping while these things hatch. It's like they really wanted to show us, like, we've spared no expense here. We're going to show you everything you want to see, all of the squishiness and grossness in its glory.
Yeah, I love how much time it takes, because we do see, like, we see the fully formed Elizabeth at one point and all of this, but then we get the big money sequence, where you get the whole process from beginning to end almost.
And then we get the sort of chase sequences, and again, they've really upped the ante, I think, from the 50s version in terms of the chases, because the chases, like, in the 50s version, we see these kind of like big sweeping shots of hills as like, our characters are running around, running up steps and all this. But with this movie, it's very dark and shadowy, isn't it? They're kind of running down those that kind of very hilly San Francisco kind of terrain and steep steps, and they're hiding under steps and all of this kind of thing. And it's very quiet. I think in my head, I feel like there wasn't much score during these moments either. They kind of let all of those chase sequences play out quite quietly as well. And I really love the way that those scenes were pulled off,
Yeah, it's mostly footsteps and things like that. And it really makes you feel like there is no escape, because everywhere they go, you're in a city. In the original, they could run, and 5 minutes later, they were outside the town limits and up in the hills. And here it's like they get to the water. There's nowhere left to go, and then the ships, and they say, "Okay, great, we can get on a ship." And well, no, they're loading up the ships also.
Yeah, that's a really chilling moment as well, isn't it? Where we hear music, we hear some sort of like bagpipe music or something, right? And
bagpipe Amazing Grace.
Yeah, bagpipe Amazing Grace, and I think we, along with the characters, right, think, oh, must be people, because music, like, you get the feeling like pod people aren't interested in music, they're not interested in bagpipes, but apparently they are, because then they get there and, like you say, they're loading pods and everything onto that ship, and it's like, nope, that hope is completely squashed after moments later. It's really dark,
which is why I think it's interesting that this movie doesn't have any music over the end credits.
I love that.
It's like a real, I mean, I know that Veronica Cartwright survives and is thriving wherever she may be,
of course,
but except for her, like, it really drives the point home of like, no, we're done as a species. There's going to be no more art, there's going to be no more music. the pod people have taken over, and they don't care about culture or any of those things.
Yeah, that's it. It's really chilling, and again, just the cinematography, and it felt a bit more like they were really nodding to the 50s version. I don't know if you felt that when they're running and you actually see that there's huge long shadows on walls as they're running through the streets. It looked gorgeous, didn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It really they're so small up against these unknowable massive forces.
Yes.
That are weighing down on them, and it's like, run all you want, you have to fall asleep.
Oh God, I know. What about the screams? Oh my God, the scream! This was an addition. We didn't see this in the 50s version, did we? But the moment when, and I think it's we first see the scream when Donald Sutherland kind of smashes one of the not yet fully formed pod people, right? I think it's his own one, right? He smashes his own one with like a shovel. It's really gross. It kind of squishes, and then one of them suddenly goes "ah" and screams. It is that noise again. It's like the stuff of nightmares, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, the first movie had the town siren, I think.
That's right, yes.
That was really chilling. Like, to be on the run and the siren is going and they're coming after you. And then here it's like, 1 minute she's just nice Brooke Adams and the next minute she's, wah! It's just, God. It's absolutely terrifying.
And that moment, actually, like you said, when Brooke Adams changes, I wasn't expecting to feel quite as emotionally moved by it as I did, but I was so invested in these two by the end of the movie, and they were kind of all each other had left. And that moment when she disintegrates, and he's cradling her and crying as she slowly falls asleep and then just disintegrates into mulch. It's devastating.
Going in, I knew who was going to survive and what would be left of them,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still really impactful. And I think part of that is the way their relationship develops over the course of the movie. And sort of the inevitability of death and all of this, and having to say goodbye to somebody, and 1 minute they're there and the next minute they're not.
Yeah.
And it's so, for all of the craziness, like, the dog moment.
We haven't spoken about the dog.
There's the whole dog. But for some of the crazier moments, or like the ending that really sticks with you, it's such a sort of subtle way of addressing it, of just like him embracing her as she kind of withers away to nothing, is really sad and really beautiful.
And again, I just can't help but think, and I think it's maybe also got something to do with the fact that she's wearing red in that scene, but I cannot help but think of Don't Look Now a little bit as well, and the way he's kind of holding her as she dies at that moment, and it is his weird noises. The weirdest moment in Don't Look Now is when he's hanging from that church roof. That's that moment when the scaffolding breaks and he's just going for ages. It's really such a weird movie, that is.
It's even weirder that that's all ADR.
Yeah.
Also, like, okay,
it's
Donald.
Even more uncanny, yeah.
Yeah, here's the movie. We're going to show it to you. You're dangling from the... like, what are you doing, Donald? Love him.
I've got my friend has an amazing story. He's a film journalist, and he went to a press junket where Donald Sutherland was there. I think it was for one of the Hunger Games movies, and he was there, that awful kind of press junket scenario where you go in, you get your 10 minutes with the person, and then you leave, and the next journalist comes in, and there's loads of, publicists in the room and all of that kind of thing. And he got shown into this hotel room, sat opposite Donald Sutherland. Donald Sutherland, he said, was all right, but he was clearly a bit bored, didn't really want to be talking about the Hunger Games, couldn't really give a fuck, And suddenly there was a power cut in this hotel, and all of the lights just went completely out, and he was sat just in darkness. And obviously all of the cameras had cut. The publicist kind of suddenly went, they sort of said to my friend who was the journalist, they said, do you mind maybe stepping outside until we get stuff back up and running? And Donald Sutherland went, no, let him stay. And they sort of went, okay. And my friend was then he said it was the most surreal 5 minutes he'd ever had. He just sat for 5 minutes in complete darkness opposite Donald Sutherland. And Donald Sutherland clearly quite enjoyed like this opportunity to talk to somebody not on camera and not about the films. And he went, so tell me a bit about yourself then. So he had this kind of surreal dating in the dark experience with an old Donald Sutherland, which, he said was one of his single favourite junket experiences. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah, for a second, I thought you were going to say the lights went out and then your friend just heard, oh! Yeah.
That
which
would
wouldn't surprise me, you know? Yeah. He's still imposing.
Still looking like he's not really enjoying himself, but you know.
Yeah.
So there you go. And then of course, like that final few moments. I mean, like the kind of forced happy ending, I suppose, of the 50s version is really, there's none of that here, right?
Absolutely none.
What do you think of those sort of final few scenes of this movie?
It's so well done because you really can't, and maybe it's, Donald Sutherland's inherent sinister qualities, but you can't really tell if he's faking it or not.
Yeah.
As he's going through the motions at the office, you can't tell. And then, man, it just pulls the rug out from under you at the last second, right? It's so good. It's so bleak. It's so sad.
It is a genuinely quite surprising moment, I think, isn't it? Because you so want to believe that he is faking it. And that in itself is still quite bleak because you're like, well, what's this guy's life now? He just is going to fake it for the rest of his life and just live like this, It's kind of like, you almost feel less sorry for him knowing that he ends up being a pod person, right? It's like,
he's still doing all the same bullshit, but he can't enjoy like all the things we do to alleviate the bullshit.
Yeah, it's kind of like a fate worse than death, isn't it? In a way,
yeah.
But yeah, it is a chilling ending, and you're right. Like going from that noise, that cacophony of noise when he makes that scream, and then Veronica screams, and then into the just silent credits as well. It's just it's powerful stuff.
It really is. It's a very powerful movie. It just so well conveys the inevitability of everything, and just being at the mercy of forces that are so much larger than you. Like, it's such a cynical, bleak worldview, but it's very 70s American politics.
Yeah, I know. Kind of love it. I love a good bleak ending. Yeah. And that does die away a bit in the 80s, doesn't it? It does feel a bit like when we get into 80s horror, it's a bit more like, oh, everything's going to be okay kind of thing again, doesn't it? That kind of dies away a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't mind, like, the episode of Gaylords of Darkness that's coming out this coming week, as we record this. Anthony and I talked a little bit about bleak endings. Right. And it's like, it's one thing when it's an earned bleak ending, like this movie.
Yeah.
Like, this is how this movie had to end, right? How could they, when you see Donald Sutherland, like, throwing light bulbs at the pods, it's like, okay, well, good try, but they're also, the ships are loaded, Donald. Like,
that ship has literally sailed. Yeah.
Versus the bleak ending that is there just to be a cool twist. Like the end of The Descent Part 2, where it's like, this is just a stupid bad ending.
Oh, yeah. Don't talk to me about The Descent Part 2. I'm still mad that movie exists, but you're right. And I can never quite make up my mind. I don't want to spoil it, but The Mist, right, has one of those endings.
Right.
I can never quite make up my mind whether that is just really vindictive and unnecessary or whether it's kind of perfect, but that is an ending that kind of wallops you at the end as well, isn't it?
That one I feel I'd feel better about it if it took a little longer. It feels like it happens so abruptly that it's like,
I think
you could have waited to see how it turned out another day or so, maybe.
Yeah, that's it. There's something so abrupt about it that it almost feels a bit like a punchline or something. There's something about the timing of it and the way that it just then ends that you're like, you almost want to laugh at how bleak it is. But yeah, I mean, that is it. But I love the complete, the gobsmack of the ending of Body Snatchers, and then just being left with silent credits. There's something even more kind of chilling about that, isn't there? It's just so good.
Yeah, you just sit in the quiet and think about that, huh?
Yeah, exactly. exactly. Off you go. And you could just imagine people quietly kind of picking up their popcorn and like gathering their things and walking out of a silent movie theater. I kind of love that, you know.
Yeah. It's still so powerful. Like, that's the thing. As much as that sequence is iconic, it still just knocks you out.
Completely. This whole film, from beginning to end, literally from the opening credits until the closing credits, gobsmacked me. I loved it so much. I think it's pretty much a perfect horror movie. This is a 5-star movie for me. Just so good. We are going to wrap up shortly, but first of all, let's head on over to this week's Wild About Horror segment, because I cannot wait to hear what Freudian cinephile Mary Wild thinks of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Hey Mike, Mary Wild returning for more alien talk. This week I focus my Freudian gaze on Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Don Siegel's 1956 release, as well as Philip Kaufman's 1978 remake, adapted from Jack Finney's science fiction novel. These films are essential viewing for scholars of human psychology, and they make for exceptionally good-looking cinema. The basic storyline relates to alien plant spores from space that invade Earth and grow into large seed pods, producing a visually identical copy of humans, assimilating physical characteristics, memory, and personality. The duplicates, however, are devoid of all human emotion. Ostensibly, the pods are meant to be seductive. Their spokesperson in the remake, a psychiatrist, provides an authoritative voice that would appeal to the desire to abdicate from human responsibility in an increasingly complex and confusing modern world. In the 1956 version of the film, there appears to be a commentary on the dangers facing America for turning a blind eye to Joseph McCarthy's notorious witch hunt, denouncing people for supposed communist activities. Others interpreted the film as an allegory for the erosion of the liberal values of individual rights and democracy. There does seem to be a preoccupation in the story with the loss of personal autonomy that happens to occur in totalitarian regimes. However, the film's lead actor, coincidentally named Kevin McCarthy, said in an interview that he felt no specific political messaging was deliberately reflected in the work, a claim supported by one of the film's producers, Walter Mirisch, who said, quote, "People read meanings into pictures that were never intended. It was a thriller, pure and simple," end quote. Director Don Siegel spoke more openly of an existing subtext that transcended a strictly political perspective, saying, quote, "I think the world is populated by pods, and I wanted to show them. So many people have no feeling about cultural things, no feeling of pain, of sorrow. I tried not to emphasize the reference to McCarthyism and totalitarianism because I feel that motion pictures are primarily to entertain and I did not want to preach," end quote. I personally admire this attitude of filmmakers choosing not to overstate their own political or ideological leanings and allowing the cinematic material to function purely as a projective test, eliciting meaningful subjective associations that may naturally arise from spectators. In Philip Kaufman's 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the fundamental plot is sustained. Humans are replaced by alien duplicates. Each is a perfect copy of the swapped person, but devoid, once again, of human emotion. This film is visually stunning. We see gelatinous creatures abandoning their dying planet and landing in San Francisco. The opening shots of the silent takeover are spectacular, immersing us powerfully into a devastating microbiological event. The aliens infiltrate Earth's ecosystem, latching on to plant life, and present as small pods with fragrant pink flowers. Elizabeth, a laboratory scientist, brings one of the flowers home. The next morning, her boyfriend Jeffrey begins to act strangely, cold and distant. Jeffrey's behavior is shown to be part of a wider societal pattern. Other people are now complaining of similar scenarios where they believe their spouse is somehow different. It turns out that aliens are gestating inside pods before breaking open and spawning a human duplicate that grows rapidly. The pods copy humans while they are sleeping nearby. Once the duplication is complete, the original human dies and disintegrates, and the alien pod person takes their place. This specifically links to a psychiatric concept I have previously mentioned on this podcast, the misidentification delusion called Capgras syndrome, the belief that a spouse has been replaced by an identical-looking imposter, initially referred to as an illusion of lookalikes. This false belief is terrifying, creating an uncanny effect that cancels out the longed-for reassuring quality of the home, introducing an unwelcome element of alienation in a space that ought to be reliable, predictable, and safe. Capgras syndrome taps into the fear that all of us might unconsciously experience, the possibility that a person we think we know is in fact someone else, leading to feelings of mistrust and betrayal. Going further, the unsettling awareness grows that we are stranger even to ourselves, that if absolute knowledge of the other is unattainable, so it follows that we are equally disaffected from ourselves. One would be forgiven to assume, when it becomes obvious that something weird is going on, that we are witnessing the beginning of a pandemic. But as collective anxiety escalates, speculation about the spread of the unknown malignancy intensifies. The virulent germ is coded for biological warfare and taps into the fear of annihilation present during the Cold War era when this film was made. In one of the most startling scenes of Philip Kaufman's Remake, a hysterical man warns of danger and shouts, "They're coming! You'll be next!" before being chased away on the street by a mob of people, then hit by a car. Bystanders silently watch him die without a trace of emotion. This highlights the horrific outcome of dehumanization, stripping away the capacity for empathy and warmth towards other people. The alien invasion threatens to rob us of our humanity, with people turning into unfeeling automatons. I love the way this film illustrates a concern that plagues the modern era. Alongside the numbing of emotional capacity, there was a powerful fear of losing individual identity through conformity and groupthink. This connects to a theory developed in Sigmund Freud's seminal book, Civilization and Its Discontents, published in 1930, in which he outlines the tensions between the individual's quest for instinctual freedom and a society's demand for conformity and repression. Here the conflict occurs between our internal world and the expectations of society. Invasion of the Body Snatchers represents the harm done by human relationships in the process of establishing civilization. We are compelled to accept the rules of society as binding. To go against them is to risk expulsion from the dominant group. Primal pleasure and individual autonomy are exchanged for the security and stability that living among others offers. We might ultimately feel that we belong, but we have paid dearly for this privilege. We have paid with liberty and individual rights. Herein lies the inescapable paradox. Civilization, created to eliminate loneliness, becomes a source of unhappiness and neurosis, making aliens of us all. Freud warned that unchecked groupthink leads to a severe decline in society, a frightening community, totalitarianism, dystopia. He has, of course, been proven to be correct. Another driving force of these movies is the overwhelming feeling of paranoia felt by those not yet invaded, that other people are in cahoots together, participating in a covert plot. As Elizabeth says in the remake, quote, "I keep seeing these people all recognizing each other. Something's passing between them all, some secret. It's a conspiracy." End quote. While it would be easy to attribute this concept to a straightforward representation of psychosis, I think it is more interesting to analyze conspiracy as a signifier that denotes the illicit dynamic of the central couple in Philip Kaufman's Remake, Matthew and Elizabeth. The nature of their relationship hinges on infidelity. Elizabeth is spoken for, but she and Matthew are in love. A simple romance is not possible. It is inherently a complicated situation. Shot in close proximity, the film pulls us into their intimacy. We hunker down with them and bear witness to their cloistered eroticism. This warrants an interpretation that the story is really a conspiracy of two, a couple who copes with the challenges of a forbidden affair by invoking a problem over which they can bond. A drama that binds them together. Thought of in this way, Matthew Bennell, played masterfully by Donald Sutherland, becomes the real body snatcher of the story, from the perspective of the hard-done-by Jeffrey, who loses his girlfriend to Matthew. This film captures the terrifying alienation that can invade a space once full of love, and I appreciate the fact that various readings of it are possible. Till next time.
A big thank you to the incredible Mary Wild. And don't forget, if you want to hear more of Mary, you can subscribe to her podcast. That's the Projections Podcast. You can find that on all the normal places where you get your podcasts. And for any other info about any other events or courses or anything else Mary's got coming up, then follow her on Twitter. You can find her there at PsychStar. Okay, Stacie, we are going to wrap up shortly. But first of all, the legacy of Body Snatchers. Of course, Invasion of the Body Snatchers in 1978 was not the last version of this story. There was another version, Body Snatchers, in 1993. There was also a movie called The Invasion with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig in 2007. And I think there's been a TV version as well. So this has been something that's come back again and again. Are you familiar at all, Stacie, with any of these other versions?
I'm familiar with them, but I haven't seen them. But they've been on my I need to see these lists forever. Like the Body Snatchers, it's like it's Abel Ferrara, right? Directed
I know. I've still not watched this either. I've heard mixed things, but I do need to check it out at some point. Yeah.
It's, if anything, like knowing he directed it, it's like it's probably going to be a little bonkers.
Yes.
And Meg Tilly is in it. I adore Meg Tilly.
Mm-hmm.
And then I really kind of want to see, I didn't realize, but Invasion, the Nicole Kidman, Daniel Craig movie, I didn't realize that's written by Dave Kajanik, who wrote the Suspiria remake.
That is really interesting. Now, I don't exactly know what the deal is with this film, but I think it had some kind of troubled production or something that... there's a reason why I think it was a bit of a flop, and I'm just looking at it now. It's got like 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, it didn't do well. But I'm kind of intrigued to check it out as well. Yeah. I wonder what went wrong with that movie. But yeah. And then I guess there are kind of unofficial remakes. I mean, it feels like The Faculty, right, is a kind of like 90s teen postmodern twist on it. I mean, they even, in that very 90s way, talk about Invasion of the Body Snatchers in the film and reference it and everything. But that kind of is doing a similar thing, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, even The Thing... right, which I know is based on, its own 1950s property, but it's still that same like, who can you trust?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's like to go back to the dog from the 78 version. Like that to me just, it's so silly, first of all.
Yeah. What is with the dog? Why is that there? That's a very weird moment. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's, they pass by the sort of the homeless man sleeping with his dog. And so, okay, they're going to get taken over, but then Donald Sutherland like smashes the pod that's near them. And I guess that's
right.
So then you know how it is, the DNA gets all mixed up.
It all gets, merged, spliced, whatever. Yeah.
It's so silly and like comes out of nowhere. But I just, every time I see it, I'm like, is this footage from The Thing? Like that's where that belongs,
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. I wonder how influential... I mean, clearly this movie is very influential, I guess, on so much.
Yeah.
If just as much as, if not more, influential than the 50s version, I guess, in a lot of ways. But yeah, you can't help but think, surely that they must have partly inspired movies like The Thing, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's just as slimy.
Just as slimy, just as grim, exactly. I wonder if we'll ever see any more Invasion of the Body Snatchers type of movies. I think it's just such a great format, isn't it? It's the however it gets taken on, but that idea of like who is themselves and who isn't themselves, and who can you trust and who can't you trust. Like that in itself is just such a great storytelling device, I suppose, that it's something that's always going to be used in one way or another.
Yeah. It feels like politically... Mm-hmm. We're probably coming around to another era where it will be very applicable, as people, as QAnon takes over.
Oh my God, yes, you're so right. You're so right.
Who can we trust?
Who can we trust? Oh my God. End of the world narratives as well, I imagine, are going to be pretty popular over the next few years, aren't they?
Yep. Good times.
Well, Stacie, thank you so much for joining me once again. It's been such a joy. And my last question for you, actually, I forgot to ask, while we're on this spacey cosmic subgenre, what's your favourite? If you were to pick one favourite from this subgenre of kind of sci-fi, alien, cosmic horror, what's your favourite?
Wowzy, wow. Well, I mean, if it has to have aliens in it, I suppose. I mean, Alien, right? I mean, it's such a banal answer, but my God, what a film.
You can't beat it, can you? It's just incredible.
You really can. Is it a horror movie? I don't know.
Yes, it is.
But God, that one, just the cast. I so appreciate the sort of slasher movie framework. I appreciate the body horror. I appreciate its working class characters.
Yes.
I'm really into that. I love the small scale of it, even though it's like a cosmic story. I love the small scale of it, that it's, even though it's in outer space, it feels very real. Just a perfect movie.
It's everything that Ridley Scott has since got wrong in his other Alien movies, right? Like, why is he no longer able to just create like these kind of really interesting, realistic blue collar character? Like, that people don't talk like human beings anymore in Prometheus and Alien Covenant. It's terrible.
Like they were just worried about their paychecks in Alien.
Yes,
you know, it's I don't know what happened. People, you know, they all disappear up their own asses eventually, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like some sort of body-snatching parasite.
Yeah. You fall asleep, and the next thing you know, whoop,
pod
there
person.
you go. Yeah.
There you go. Well, Stacie, thank you so much for joining us. And just remind us again where people can find all of the amazing stuff you do out there, podcasts and blogs and magazines and everything else.
Wow. Okay. Well, I do have a blog, Final Girl. You could find that at finalgirl.rocks. Podcast, Gaylords of Darkness. We have new episodes every Wednesday. You can find out all about that at gaylordsofdarkness.com or wherever the finest podcasts are given away for free. And I'm in the pages of Rhubarb magazine. It's bi-monthly Canadian magazine, one of the best horror magazines that has ever existed.
It really is. Yeah. And congratulations on that again. That's so fantastic.
Thank you. I have a column every issue. Plus I do some reviews and the occasional feature and things like that. So support Rhubarb, support print magazines.
Hell yeah. Absolutely.
I guess that's it.
Amazing. Well, Stacie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. This was really a real treat.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to this week's guest, one of my very favourite people, one of my very favourite podcasters, Stacie Ponder. So please do get in touch. What did you think of this week's episode, and what do you think of these two incredible movies, Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 56 and from 78? Which is your favourite? I would love to hear your thoughts. Please do get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Letterboxd. And if you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners and anything else horror related, join our discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and you can find that on Facebook. If you want to pick up some EOH merch, get yourself a hoodie, a t-shirt, or anything else, then find that on our website, evolutionofhorror.com. Grab yourself something while stocks last. If you want to support this podcast and get treated to weekly bonus content, then sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Acast, Libsyn, and Spotify. If you get a spare minute, I would be so grateful if you could leave us a little rating and review on Apple Podcasts, preferably a positive one, but you don't have to. It does really help us get discovered by new listeners. Okay, on to next week then, and we are going to continue once again with another double bill, a 50s classic and its incredible remake. Next week, I'm going to be joined by writer, filmmaker Kat Davis, and we are going to be discussing none other than The Blob from 1958. And then we're going to jump 30 years into the future to discuss The Blob from 1988. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific, and give them both a watch, particularly that 80s version if you can, ahead of next week's discussion. Thank you so much for listening, and join us again next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.